Courtney Love reveals Kurt's last night, the truth finally exposed. Courtney Love had kept silent about the final phone call for 27 years. But when she finally broke her silence during a private therapy session that was accidentally recorded, what she revealed about Kurt Cobain's last night alive changed everything. The world thought it knew about April 5th. The recording, which surfaced through a court-ordered document release in 2021, contained 43 minutes of Courtney describing conversations, events, and details from that night that contradicted the official narrative. But the most chilling revelation wasn't about what Kurt said or did. It was about who was with him in those final hours, and why that person's identity had been hidden from investigators, the media, and even Kurt's closest friends for nearly 3 decades. What makes this confession particularly devastating is that Courtney revealed she had actually spoken to Kurt twice on his final night, once at 11:47 p.m. Seattle time, and again at 2. In both calls, Kurt gave her specific instructions about their daughter Frances, about unreleased music hidden in their home, and about a letter he'd written but never sent to someone from his past. But it was what Kurt said in the second call that would haunt Courtney forever, words that suggested he wasn't alone, and that his final decision might not have been entirely his own. The therapy session recording revealed that Courtney had been carrying the weight of knowing the truth about that night, but legal threats and personal fear had kept her silent. Now, facing her own mortality and struggling with decades of guilt, she finally disclosed what really happened during those last dark hours in the greenhouse above the garage. April 5, 1994 started like many other days in the Cobain household, except Kurt had been missing for 6 days after leaving a rehab facility in Los Angeles. Courtney was in Los Angeles with Frances, frantically trying to locate her husband while maintaining a public facade that everything was under control. "I knew he was at the Seattle house." Courtney's voice trembled on the recording. "Everyone thinks I didn't know where he was, but I knew. He'd called me from there on April 3rd, sounding strange, but coherent. He said he needed 2 more days to figure something out, something about making things right with everyone." The first call on April 5th came while Courtney was at the Peninsula Hotel in Beverly Hills. Frances was asleep in the next room, and Courtney had been on the phone with various private investigators and friends, trying to coordinate an intervention without alerting the media. "When my phone rang at 11:47, I knew it was him before I even looked," Courtney revealed in the session. "There was this feeling in my chest, like something was pulling me toward the phone." Kurt's voice was different. Not high, not slurred, but distant, like he was already somewhere else mentally. According to Courtney's confession, Kurt spent the first 20 minutes of the call talking about Frances, giving detailed instructions about her education, her trust fund, and even which of his guitars he wanted her to have when he turned 18. He was methodical, almost businesslike, checking off items on what seemed to be a mental list. He kept saying, "Write this down, Court, this is important," Courtney recalled. "I was scrambling for paper, trying to write everything while begging him to tell me what was wrong. But he just kept talking about Frances, what songs he wanted her to learn, which of his journals she could read, which ones should be destroyed." Then Kurt said something that made Courtney's blood run cold. He mentioned the visitor who had been coming to see him at the Seattle house, someone who had been helping him understand what needed to happen. "I asked him who was there with him." Courtney's voice broke on the recording. "He got quiet for a long time, then said, 'Someone who understands the weight of this thing, Court. Someone who's been where I'm going.'" Courtney pressed him for details, but Kurt deflected, returning to his instructions about Frances and their assets. He told her about a safety deposit box at a Seattle bank that contained unreleased recordings, not Nirvana material, but solo acoustic songs he'd recorded on a 4-track in their basement. He said there were 12 songs recorded between January and March of '94, Courtney revealed. He called them his confession songs and said they were only for Frances, that she should get them when she turned 20. "He made me promise not to let anyone else hear them, especially not the record label." The call ended abruptly when Kurt heard something in the house. "I have to go," he said suddenly. "They're here." When Courtney asked who they were, Kurt simply said, "The helpers." "Don't worry, Court. Everything is already decided." The line went dead at 12:43. Courtney immediately called the Seattle house back, but there was no answer. She called 15 more times over the next hour, growing increasingly frantic. She was about to call the police when her phone rang again at 2:31 a.m. The second call was worse. Courtney admitted in the therapy session. Kurt sounded resolved, like he'd made peace with something terrible. He wasn't crying or angry or high. He was calm in a way that terrified me. This call lasted only 11 minutes, but its content would haunt Courtney for the rest of her life. Kurt told her he'd written a letter, not the suicide note that was found, but a different letter, raced to someone named Michael, from his childhood in Aberdeen. He said Michael would understand why he had to complete the circle. Courtney revealed. He kept using that phrase, completing the circle. He said Michael was the only person who knew about what happened when Kurt was 7 years old. Something about a barn and a promise he'd made. Courtney begged Kurt to explain, but he remained cryptic. He told her the letter to Michael was hidden inside the lining of his favorite green cardigan, the one he'd worn in the MTV Unplugged performance. He instructed her to make sure Michael got it, but only after Francis turned 8. I asked him why he was telling me all this. Courtney's voice was barely audible on the recording. He said, "Because by tomorrow, I won't be able to tell anyone anything." The most chilling revelation from the therapy session came when Courtney described hearing another voice in the background during the second call. It was faint, but distinctly male, speaking in what seemed to be a calm, encouraging tone. I heard someone say, "It's time," and Kurt responded, "I know," Courtney confessed. When I screamed asking who was there, Kurt said something that still doesn't make sense to me. He said, "It's just the ferryman, Court. He's been waiting for me since I was 23. The reference to age 23 was significant. That was when Kurt had his first serious suicide attempt in 1990, an incident that was largely hidden from the public, but known to close friends and family. The idea that someone had been waiting for him since then suggested a long-standing death wish, or perhaps something even more disturbing. Courtney revealed that she tried to keep Kurt on the phone, but he was determined to end the call. His last words to her were not, "I love you" or "goodbye," but something far more cryptic and disturbing. He said, "The crow has been calling for 3 days, Court. Even you can't fight nature." Then he hung up, Courtney disclosed. I didn't understand what he meant then, but later, when they found him, there were crow feathers all over the greenhouse floor. Dozens of them. The investigators never mentioned them in the reports. After the second call ended, Courtney made a decision that would torment her for decades. Instead of immediately calling the police, or flying to Seattle herself, she called Dylan Carlson, Kurt's best friend, and asked him to check the house. But she didn't tell Dylan about the calls or her certainty that Kurt was there. "I thought if I sent the police, it would become a media circus," Courtney admitted in the session. "I thought Dylan could talk him down, could get him somewhere safe quietly. I never thought he would actually." Dylan went to the house on the morning of April 6th, but didn't check the greenhouse. He looked in the main house, saw no signs of Kurt, and left. It wouldn't be until April 8th that Kurt's body would be discovered by an electrician who had come to install a security system. The therapy session revealed another devastating detail. Courtney had actually flown to Seattle on April 6th, the day after the phone calls, but had been advised by her lawyer not to go to the house herself due to an ongoing dispute with Kurt about intervention and conservatorship proceedings. "I was 10 minutes away from the house," Courtney sobbed on the recording. 10 minutes. "But my lawyer said if I showed up and Kurt was there, he could use it against me in court, say I was harassing him. So I stayed at the hotel, waiting for Dylan to report back. While I was sitting in that hotel room, Kurt was already." The recording revealed that Courtney had hired a private investigator, Tom Grant, not just to find Kurt, but to investigate who might have been with him in those final days. She suspected several people, including a drug dealer named Caitlin Moore, who had been supplying Kurt with heroin, and a mysterious figure known only as Seattle Mike, who had been seen at the house by neighbors. The neighbors told the investigator they saw someone in a dark coat entering and leaving the greenhouse multiple times on April 5th. Courtney revealed. But when the police investigated, they said the neighbors were mistaken, that the timeline didn't match. But I know what the neighbors saw was real. One of the most disturbing revelations from the therapy session concerned the suicide note. Courtney admitted that the note found at the scene wasn't the only thing Kurt wrote that night. According to her confession, there were at least 3 other pieces of writing that were either destroyed or hidden. The note everyone knows about, the one that quotes Neil Young, that was meant for everyone, Courtney explained, but there were others. One for Frances, that I was supposed to give her when she turned 18. I did give it to her, and she's never spoken about what it said. One for Michael, that's still hidden in the cardigan, and one that was destroyed. When the therapist asked about the destroyed note, Courtney became audibly distressed. It named names, she said cryptically. It talked about things that happened in the music industry, about people who had hated him, about debts that weren't about money. I had to destroy it. If it had come out, it would have destroyed so many lives. The confession also shed light on Kurt's state of mind in his final weeks. Courtney revealed that Kurt had been experiencing what he called visitors, hallucinations or delusions of people from his past who had died, including his great-uncle Burl, who had committed suicide in. He said Burl had been visiting him, telling him about the other side. Courtney disclosed. He said Burla told him that suicide wasn't what religions taught, that it was actually a form of transcendence for certain souls who were too sensitive for this world. I tried to tell him it was the drugs, but he insisted the visits happened when he was completely sober. The therapy recording revealed that Kurt had been planning his death for much longer than anyone realized. Courtney described finding notebooks dating back to 1992 with detailed plans, including the exact location in the greenhouse and the method he would use. He had it all mapped out, Courtney said through tears. He knew that spot in the greenhouse would be visible from the window but not from the ground, so he wouldn't traumatize any random person walking by. He'd calculated how long it would take for someone to find him based on his usual patterns of disappearance. He'd even practiced. The mention of practice sent chills through anyone who heard the recording. Courtney explained that she'd found evidence that Kurt had gone through the motions of his suicide multiple times in the months leading up to April 5th, each time stopping just short of the final act. I found Polaroids, Courtney revealed. He'd taken pictures of himself in that position, in that spot. When I found them after his death, I realized he'd been rehearsing, preparing himself mentally for months. The photos were dated October 93, December 93, February 94, and then March 94. Each time his expression was more peaceful, more resolved. Perhaps the most heartbreaking revelation concerned a final message Kurt left that was never made public. According to Courtney, Kurt had recorded a cassette tape on the morning of April 5th, speaking directly to Frances for an hour about his love for her and his hopes for her future. He knew she wouldn't remember him, Courtney said. She was so young, so he made this tape, talking to her like she was older, telling her stories about his childhood, about how he felt when she was born, about the songs he wrote for her that no one would ever hear. He even sang to her lullabies his mom had sung to him. The tape, according to Courtney, was in the greenhouse with Kurt when he died, but was taken by someone before the police arrived. She suspected it was the same person who had been with Kurt that night. The mysterious ferryman he had mentioned. Whoever was with him that night took things, Courtney insisted. Not valuable things. They left his wallet, his jewelry, but they took personal things. The tape for Frances, some of his journals, and a box of photographs from his childhood. Things that had no value to anyone but him. The therapy session also revealed Courtney's suspicions about why Kurt chose April 5th, specifically. It wasn't random, it was exactly 4 years after he and Courtney had first discussed having a child, during a conversation in a hotel room in New York City. He was obsessed with cycles and anniversaries, Courtney explained. April 5th, 1990, we talked about bringing a life into the world. April 5th, 1994. He chose to take his life out of it. He saw it as some kind of cosmic balance. The recording exposed the fact that Courtney had been receiving anonymous letters since Kurt's death, all claiming to be from the person who was with him that night. The letters contained details only someone present could have known, including Kurt's last words and descriptions of items in the greenhouse that were never photographed or catalogued. The letters say Kurt didn't die alone, that someone held his hand until the end. Courtney revealed. They say he was at peace, that he smiled before. They say he asked them to watch over Francis from the other side. I don't know if the letters are real or if someone is playing a sick game, but the details are things only someone who was there could know. One of the most disturbing aspects of Courtney's confession was her revelation about Kurt's belief that he was part of something larger, something he called the 27 Club, though Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, and Janis Joplin had all died at that age. Kurt was still, and he seemed to believe he was destined to join them. He talked about it constantly in those last months, Courtney admitted. He said he'd had dreams where Jimmy and Janis were calling to him, telling him there was a place reserved for him. He believed the 27 Club wasn't just coincidence, but some kind of cosmic gathering of souls who were too bright for this world. The therapy session revealed that, on his last night, Kurt had been listening to specific music on repeat, not Nirvana, not punk rock, but a cassette tape of Leadbelly recordings that had belonged to his great-uncle Burrow. The same tape had been playing when Burrow was found after his suicide in 19. It was like he was following a script written by someone else, Courtney said. Even the position they found him in was identical to how Burrow was found. The only difference was the location. Burrow was in a barn, Kurt was in the greenhouse. As the therapy session neared its end, Courtney made her most shocking revelation. She admitted that she had found evidence that Kurt had been in contact with someone claiming to be part of a transition assistance group. People who allegedly helped those who wanted to die to do so peacefully. I found a business card hidden in his journal, Courtney confessed. No name, just a phone number and the words "when you're ready to transition." I called the number after he died. A woman answered and said, "We've been expecting your call, Mrs. Cobain." Kurt completed his transition successfully. Then the line went dead, and the number was disconnected. The existence of such a group, if real, raised disturbing questions about whether Kurt had help in his final act, whether someone had encouraged or enabled his suicide. Courtney's revelation suggested a dark network operating in the shadows, preying on vulnerable people in their darkest moments. "I've never told anyone about that call," Courtney admitted in the recording. "I was terrified. If there really was a group like that, what if they came after Francis? What if they saw her as another potential transition?" The therapy session recording ended with Courtney's most painful admission, that she believed she could have saved Kurt if she had just gotten on a plane immediately after the first call, instead of trying to handle things from a distance.
"I knew in my heart he was saying goodbye," she sobbed.
Every word, every instruction about Francis, every detail about the hidden songs, it was all goodbye. And instead of running to him, I stayed in that hotel room, making phone calls, trying to manage the situation. I chose being his manager over being his wife, and it cost him his life. The revelation of this recording in 2021 sent shockwaves through the music world and reopened debates about Kurt Cobain's death that had been dormant for years. The suggestion that he wasn't alone, that someone may have been encouraging or assisting him, transformed the narrative from a simple suicide to something more complex and sinister. Frances Bean Cobain, now 29 years old, has never publicly commented on her mother's recorded confession. However, sources close to her say she has been conducting her own investigation into the identity of Michael and the contents of the letter that was supposedly hidden in Kurt's cardigan. The Seattle Police Department, when presented with the recording, stated that while the information was interesting, it didn't provide sufficient evidence to reopen the case. The greenhouse above the garage at the Lake Washington house has since been demolished, taking with it any physical evidence that might have remained. Dylan Carlson, Kurt's best friend who was asked to check the house, has maintained his silence about that period, saying only, "There are things about those days that will go to my grave with me. Some secrets are meant to stay buried." The identity of the ferryman Kurt mentioned remains unknown. Some speculate it was a drug dealer, Others believe it was someone from the alleged transition assistance group, and still others think it may have been a hallucination brought on by Kurt's deteriorating mental state. What remains clear from Courtney's confession is that Kurt Cobain's last night was far more complex than the official narrative suggested. The presence of another person, the multiple suicide notes, the hidden recordings, and the mysterious letters all paint a picture of a death that was both deeply personal and possibly influenced by outside forces. The revelation about the confession songs Kurt recorded for Frances has led to intense speculation about their contents. Music historians believe these recordings could provide unprecedented insight into Kurt's state of mind in his final months, but Frances has honored her father's wishes and kept them private. The crow feathers found in the greenhouse, never mentioned in official reports, have become a source of particular fascination. In many cultures, crows are seen as messengers between the world of the living and the dead. Kurt's reference to the crow calling for 3 days suggests he may have seen his death as a spiritual calling rather than a desperate act. Courtney's confession also raises questions about the music industry's role in Kurt's death. Her mention of the destroyed note that named names and discussed debts that weren't about money hints at pressures and threats that have never been fully exposed. In the years since the recording surfaced, several people have come forward claiming to have information about who was with Kurt that night, but none have provided credible evidence. The mystery of the ferryman remains as one of rock music's most haunting unsolved questions. Today, Courtney Love refuses to discuss the therapy session recording, saying only that it was meant to be private and that its release has caused immeasurable pain to those who loved Kurt. She has neither confirmed nor denied the authenticity of the recording, leaving its veracity in question. What cannot be questioned is the impact of these revelations on how we understand Kurt Cobain's death. The image of him alone in that greenhouse has been replaced by something more complex, a man possibly surrounded by voices both real and imagined, making a decision that may have been influenced by forces we still don't fully understand. The truth about Kurt Cobain's last night may never be fully known, but Courtney's confession, whether every detail is accurate or not, reveals the deep trauma and unanswered questions that continue to haunt those who loved him. It transforms his death from a solitary tragedy into a mystery that continues to demand answers. As we reflect on these revelations, we're reminded that behind every public tragedy is a private pain that can never be fully understood by those on the outside. Kurt Cobain's last night, as revealed through Courtney's confession, was not just the end of a rock star's life, but a complex human moment filled with love, fear, mystery, and possibly dark interference from those who should have protected him. The songs Kurt recorded for Frances, the letter to Michael, the identity of the ferryman, these mysteries ensure that Kurt Cobain's death will continue to be examined, questioned, and mourned for generations to come. In death as in life, he remains an enigma, a brilliant light that was extinguished too soon, leaving behind questions that may never be answered. If this revelation about Kurt's final night moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the complex truth behind the legends. Have you ever discovered hidden truths about someone's final days that changed everything you believed? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more untold stories about music's most mysterious moments.